Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the meeting for May Drive, North Dupont Avenue, and Duling Avenue. My name is David Greaves. I work with NDOT on the Neighborhood Street Traffic Calming Program. This is a virtual meeting held on January 9th, 2024. It's actually 7 p.m. Central Time, not 6 p.m., but I think that all of the mail material that went out had that correct time on it, seeing as you all have joined here at 7. So this is a joint meeting between 3 projects. So each street has its own set of plans and will have its own ballot. But just for this first meeting here, we're all meeting together because the streets are close together geographically. Additionally, they have similar design constraints and concept designs for them. So we'll get started just kind of by reviewing what is traffic calming. The Neighborhood Street Traffic Calming Program focuses on residential streets only. So arterials, big kind of higher volume collectors, those generally get excluded from the program due to other NDOT departments focusing on those. This is mainly for streets where people live and have kind of lower volumes of traffic. We focus on physical solutions to encourage lower speeds over kind of a longer stretch of roads. So we don't often treat like one block at a time. We usually choose a longer length of road to work on. And the primary goal is speed reduction. To recap a little bit, there are kind of the 3 E's of traffic calming. That's education, enforcement, and engineering. Education is really kind of what we're doing now, as well as sort of just informing folks who are driving about speeding, why driving unsafely is harmful. Enforcement, that's totally out of NDOT's hands. So we don't have the ability to write tickets or anything like that. And mainly the police department is in charge of that. They unfortunately are stretched really thin. So we often cannot rely on speed enforcement being the primary way that speeding is prevented. And finally, that brings us to engineering. So that's really what we're here to discuss. We've designed some solutions for each of these streets that ought to help curb the speeding that we're experiencing out there. And I'm here to sort of just address that and answer any questions you may have. Just to sort of recap, the primary goal here is safety and vision zero. The reason we're so focused on speeds and getting them to a more appropriate level is because unfortunately people do get struck and hit by cars, and often that leads to a fatality, especially as those cars are going at higher speeds. So this infographic from the National Transportation Safety Board is sort of just intended to demonstrate how that chance of survival goes way up as the speeds of cars are in that 25-mile-an-hour range. So that's really the reason we're here to focus on making sure drivers are going at or close to 25 miles an hour, and it's just for the safety of everyone else. This is a really popular program. So the map off to the right, all those purple lines are streets that have applied for the traffic calming program. Thankfully, a lot of them have been selected, and some of those have had traffic calming installed already. But currently on file, we have about 500 applications. I think it's a little more. The selection you all were chosen in, we chose 85 neighborhood streets. That was kind of an anomaly. We usually do 25, but this time we were allocated some resources that allowed us to pick that number way up and knock out a bunch of projects at once, which we're really excited about. So there are a handful of things that the traffic calming program does and all kinds of things that we don't do. So we like to include this slide just to make sure that everyone who joins the call is aware that this is a good resource, Hub Nashville. for just about anything metro related, whether it's, trash in the street, trees down. A lot of issues with streets, roads, and sidewalks can be requested or handled through Hub. So if we encounter anything where that is the recommendation, you can either call 311 to make a request during business hours, or the easier way, in my opinion, is going online or using their app. It's pretty user friendly, and it takes just a minute to submit a request. So that's sort of the first chunk of the meeting. I want to pause and just sort of take any questions on the material we've reviewed so far. If we don't have any questions, we can also just move right along. Feel free to come off mute or speak up if you've got a question. Okay, well, let's talk about how these streets were chosen. Essentially, when NDOT gets applications for a street, they will evaluate it and collect data to basically measure how fast are people driving on this speed, how many vehicles per day are coming in. And then in addition to that data that they collect, we also look at publicly available information. So are there schools or parks nearby? Are there sidewalks in good condition? If there aren't, we like to make sure we're paying extra attention to the roadway that is there. And then also if there are any like vulnerable user injuries or fatalities, so say a pedestrian was struck by a car, in the past, we would want that experience to give the score of a neighborhood street a bump. As you all notice, the vehicular speeds and the volume are by far the heaviest weighted categories. And the reason for that is those two combined really represent the risk that's created by driving on roads. So if we measured your streets at a really high speed, that would be reflected pretty substantially in the scoring, about 45%. So like I mentioned before, this is a joint meeting. May Drive from Snow Avenue to Anderson Lane, North Dupont Avenue from Delaware Avenue to Myatt Drive, and then Duling Avenue from Gallatin Pike to Kate Street. Down below is some of the data that was considered. Coincidentally, the 85th percent speed was all 37 miles an hour on the same. So at least when these were counted, it seems like all three of these roads were experiencing some pretty serious speeding going on. There are different volumes. So North Dupont, that's the highest, about 1,600 vehicles per day. That's quite a bit, especially considering that there aren't too many residences along Dupont. It's certainly not like astronomical. The cutoff for speed cushions or kind of vertical traffic calming measures is 5,000. So these are all actually a little bit on the lower end of the volume side. But I think the speeding itself that you're experiencing is sort of what had a hand in each of these being selected. That and the proximity to Madison Park probably also had something to do with it. So this is a map. These are the limits and streets I just described, highlighted in yellow. We can see it down toward the bottom of the map. We've got Old Hickory Boulevard, and that's obviously a pretty large road that is intended to carry a lot of traffic. We don't have like really anything besides the traffic count to speculate on, but I sort of have a feeling that some of the volume that Duling is experiencing might be some folks being directed by Waze, or perhaps they already know that you can sort of dodge that big intersection between 31E and Old Hickory Boulevard by cutting through Duling. That's something we see on a lot of these traffic calming streets, is if your particular street were a potential route to skip a light or something like that, that can drive the volume up pretty substantially. These are just going to zoom in a little bit. So May Drive, this is the whole street. It just goes down to Anderson Lane, and then that's Snow Avenue up top. North Dupont, so this ends at Myatt Drive. There's also North Dupont on the eastern side, but the limits that were applied for were Delaware Avenue to Myatt. And Myatt's pretty big, so it sort of makes sense to draw the limit there for a transportation project such as this one. And then Dupont, these were the limits that were applied for. So ending at Kate Street rather than like the full length of Bixler, that was kind of the other clue that indicated to me it might be a cut-through problem more than anything else. But anyway, we're going to be able to put measures on Duling that even if it doesn't extend over all the way to Bixler Avenue, it should indicate to drivers that they should be going at a slower speed. So traffic calming treatments generally, they're intended to treat only the area, but they can also have an effect before or after along the length of a street. Now I'm going to kind of talk about, in the general sense, what are some of the tools that NDOT has for a given traffic calming project. Jumping right in, those are speed cushions, among other things, but we've potentially all seen these in Nashville. There's now quite a few of them around town. Basically what they are modular rubber devices that they're not a speed bump so much. They're only about 3 inches tall, but the intent is if you're going at a reasonable speed in that kind of 20 to 25 mile an hour range, you'll roll over them just fine. But if you were to be going over them like at a higher speed, 30, 35, 40, that experience would be uncomfortable to the driver. So presumably not worth it. But basically that's how they work. They're essentially a speed bump that's been stretched way out to achieve a higher target speed that we're sort of wanting to experience on our roadways. They're 6 feet wide. They come in a variety of lengths depending on sort of what our goals are. The reason for that 6 foot width is to make sure that emergency response vehicles like fire trucks, for instance, they have a little bit wider wheelbase, so they're able to not slow down as much as like a smaller car might have to in order to traverse these at a speed that we want fire trucks to be going. So point being, these are sort of seeking a happy middle ground where they affect most cars that people would be driving and speeding in, but they're not so onerous that emergency vehicles can't get where they're going. Speed tables are really similar. Basically, they're just like a ginormous speed cushion. They act the same way. The intent is the same. It's a vertical measure that is impeding a person speeding, whether or not they care about signs or paint or what have you. The main disadvantage of these, as I sort of alluded to, is that they potentially are a hindrance for emergency vehicles. It definitely doesn't take one long to get up and over, but we generally prefer speed cushions where we think those are a viable option for that reason. The reason that we lean on these so heavily as a department is because we know that they work. Basically, this is a study that NDOT has conducted in Nashville. It basically backs up a whole swath of national research, essentially validating the use of speed cushions as tools to lower speeds. And we can see that the average speed kind of in that conglomeration of several projects was lowered from 31 to 22. The 85th speed was lowered from 37 to 25. For anyone who doesn't know, the 85th speed, that's kind of a statistical measure of speeding that acts sort of like a median, but at that like 85th percentile mark rather than halfway. Essentially what it's intended to do is give a more accurate picture of kind of what like a normal driver is doing and not be too skewed by outliers who may be going really fast or really slow. Sort of in the category of less frequently used items, we have radar feedback signs. I suspect most people have seen one of these before, but essentially what it is a solar-powered device to check a vehicle's speed with radar and then report that back to them as they drive by. I think the ones Nashville orders will like flash red, something like that, if it detects you're going too fast. But basically, these are intended more as a reminder to people that, hey, this is the speed limit, this is what you're going, do with that what you will. The reason we don't lean on these too much is because they don't physically affect cars at all. If I felt like speeding and wanted to ignore the sign, you know, many people would do that. So we'll tend to slide these in on like hills or other areas where speed cushions aren't feasible, but they're not really our go-to for a traffic calming design. Some other options, we have pavement narrowing. So on streets that are like excessively wide and really inviting to go fast on, we found sometimes it's helpful to narrow the visual width of the pavement with these white edge lines, to sort of just like psychologically make the road feel a little smaller and induce a lower speed. We haven't found that these are like a great thing to use just by themselves and expect much to change. They have a marginal effect, but generally when used in conjunction with other things, that's kind of how we prefer to deploy them. Bulb outs and chicanes, these are some kind of more situation specific treatments on intersections that are like really wide and see a lot of fast turning movements. A bulb out is something that can kind of narrow an intersection down, remove some pavement from the field, and basically force a driver to take that turn at a safer speed. Really wide turning radii, they can be traversed by vehicles quite quickly. Like if you think about an interstate ramp, for instance, that's a really big wide turn that you're able to take fast, but we don't want that kind of driving happening on our neighborhood streets. So sometimes we found intersections can benefit from this kind of thing. Chicanes, that's where we basically take a wide road, narrow it up, and then send the path of travel in like a zigzag sort of fashion. That will slow people down by basically just forcing them to maneuver more often. It's also sort of not one of our first choices. We'll sometimes use them in conjunction with speed cushions. The main issue we run into is it's hard to do this without having some sort of on-street parking go away. Often there's still enough on-street parking, but we tend to not, let this be the first thing we propose for that reason. And then finally, in this list, we have traffic circles. These really work in Nashville when an intersection is like giant. Essentially, the request we have is for, if a traffic circle is installed, we don't want our largest vehicles to have to run over them when making certain turning movements. So there are intersections in Nashville where these are appropriate. I will say we don't have any intersections along either of these three streets that I think this will be something that would be a good fit. That's kind of it for the general section of the slideshow. Next, we're going to take a look at the three concept designs for May, Duling, and Dupont. Before we look at those plans, dig into the details, I want to just pause again, take any questions that folks might have. Okay, it sounds like we can go ahead and move on to the concept designs. Going north to south, we're going to start with May. So this view is rotated about 90 degrees. So we have Snow Avenue that runs north to south. May Drive, for the most part, runs north to south. But essentially what we're proposing is 7 sets of speed cushions. Basically, we choose locations by spacing. So the spacing that NDOT targets for these is somewhere between 300 and 500 feet apart. That's really striking a balance between not being so many that they have diminishing returns, but not being so far apart that folks driving over them have the opportunity to speed way up before getting to the next one. There is plenty of research that basically observed if you have these spread out further than an ideal distance, you almost experience higher speeds between the cushions, which is certainly not what we want here. We also don't put them on tight curves or in front of driveways. So what we seek to do is find kind of a clearance of 15 feet or so between like the edge of a cushion and the edge of a driveway. And the reason for that is we don't want anyone to have to like drive over one of these just to back out of their home. So between spacing curves, there's also a hill factor that isn't quite a constraint on May, but basically there's a lot of different competing goals that go into how these are placed, and this is sort of what we're looking at for May. Are there any questions on sort of what we're looking at here?
I have one.
Sure.
So I live on May at the house where that speed cushion is currently marked just before the corner, like the second one from the stop sign on Snow. And
Yes.
we have a parking pad in addition to our driveway. So would you guys take the parking pad into consideration as well in terms of like where you place it so that we're still able to back out?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'll take a look. I don't have the ability to zoom way in here. But yeah, if for some reason this is like in front of that parking pad, we'll make sure it's placed in a way that's not gonna impede the movement of your vehicles.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Of course. Anyone else? Okay. We all kind of heard the spiel I just gave. So very similar situation to May. North Dupont is quite a bit longer. So you'll see there are many more cushions here. But really this works out to about one per like normal city block. And that's about right in terms of spacing wise. We do like to avoid compromising on spacing when we're dealing with things like parks. So that's just kind of another factor that went into this decision. Between MacArthur and Myatt Drive, we did not have enough space between stop-controlled intersections to fit one in. Basically, there are distance thresholds between cushions and a number of different components. But I think with the two stop signs there and the speed cushions coming to or going from, I'd be surprised if we saw a lot of speeding between Myatt and MacArthur after this is installed. And then Duling, just for kind of a frame of reference, these blocks are, I believe, about the same length. This is much more zoomed in. So the three cushions we're proposing here should be about the same space apart as the ones proposed on North Dupont. Do we have any questions about either Duling or North Dupont Avenue?
Hi, this is Jeremy. What is the, I guess, once they start installing these speed cushions, this might be part of the presentation later on, but what is that process like? Do they close off streets? Do they install those in one day typically? How does that look like?
Yeah, so what this program focuses on is like called quick build infrastructure. So stuff that is really fast. Essentially, these are all bolted to the ground. The only thing you need to do to install them is lay them down, drill the holes in each of those modules, and then put bolts in the street. So I'm sure for like some period during the day, they would maybe like ask you to drive around, but I'm pretty sure they only install one at a time. So it wouldn't be, I guess I'll just say, out of all the different types of road construction that can happen, this tends to be the least disruptive. And it is pretty quick. So I don't think they like knock out the whole thing in one day, but they sort of just work on it, one piece at a time. Any other questions? Make sure I can see the chat just so we're not missing anything over there. Great. So if we don't have more questions on the plans themselves, and we can certainly go back if anyone thinks of anything. I just want to kind of review the flowchart of the program, the timeline, sort of everything that has happened so far and what will happen going forward. But basically, this program happens when streets apply. So there's two kind of like, I think, a few week long application windows. One of them is coming up in March. So if you know anyone who would like some traffic calming, please feel free to let them know about that from NDOT's website. It's pretty clear where to go. Prioritization and selection, that takes about 2 months from the application window to being complete. That's basically when we collect all of that speed and volume data, do our GIS analysis, and see where all of those streets rank amongst one another. We'll then schedule and host a neighborhood meeting. That timeline is about a month between finishing prioritization and selection. Basically, there's a lead time toward gathering everyone's information, sending out mailers to all the appropriate addresses, and then ultimately doing the concept design. Next, we will do kind of a site visit, field review, go out, check all of our assumptions ourselves, measure the pavement widths, just sort of get our eyes on the road, make sure we like fully understand what's going on each of these streets. Sometimes we don't find any surprises, but you know, plenty of times we do. So that's an important component of these neighborhood street traffic calming designs, just making sure that we're not planning projects that'll run into, you know, some unforeseen issues out in the field. After that, we can go one of two ways. So starting in this cycle, NDOT has decided to give neighbors the option of skipping a second meeting. Previously, we would always have one to sort of do what we're doing now, talk about the program in general terms, review the concepts, and then a second one to review the plans, talk more about the concepts, sort of recap meeting one. On plenty of designs, that is, you know, a good idea. Certainly, if anything were to change because of this meeting, and you wanted to review what has changed, that's a good reason to have a second meeting. The advantage of skipping it is basically just getting your plans voted on sooner. We can see the 8 to 10 months timeline for construction. That is accurate and obviously very substantial. It's not because the construction of one project takes 8 to 10 months. It only takes a few days, but currently there's a pretty huge like backlog of projects that NDOT's traffic calming contractor is working through. So a second neighborhood meeting, it doesn't really set you back anything. But if, you know, everyone feels that they've gotten the information they came for, don't really think they would get a lot out of meeting two, the option is there to just move straight on to the online ballot. You will be able to see the plans before voting. So essentially we post the ballot and the plans at the same time. If there were any like, you know, major curveballs, certainly you'd have the opportunity to let us know. But just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. Any questions about sort of how that all works? Sound like no. I will say this is kind of the time where we'll, I guess, preliminarily decide, do we want another meeting to review like a more zoomed in traffic calming plan, or are the concepts that we've taken a look at, do you kind of know what to expect and wouldn't, you know, necessarily vote one way or another? on seeing them. Okay, so I've gotten a couple messages in the chat that are sort of not really desiring a second neighborhood meeting. That sounds good. I tend to agree that these streets are relatively straightforward as traffic calming projects go. So our more detailed design be slightly more detailed, but I don't expect a whole lot to be radically different in those final construction plans. So unless I hear differently between now and balloting, we'll plan on just going ahead and doing our design and then sending everyone postcards to vote. So with that, we are going to spend a little bit of time kind of reviewing the details of that balloting process. Basically, the same way we send mailers to residents to inform them of meetings, we'll send them ballots to inform them it's time to vote yes or no on your traffic calming project. You can vote online on Nashville's website. There's a form to fill out. If for any reason that doesn't work for you, you can also call NDOT and someone will help you cast whichever vote you please. The information for doing both of those things are going to be on the mailer. But if you hear from one of your neighbors that they got a postcard and you didn't get one or anything else, please feel free to contact NDOT. We definitely don't want anyone who wants to vote to miss the opportunity to do so. It does take a threshold of 2/3 voting yes to have a project pass. Interesting. There is, sorry, for anyone who doesn't know, a question in the chat asks, is there a minimum respondent number required? There actually is not. So if one person voted yes and 0 people voted no, that would be a successful traffic calming project. We usually don't have that happen, mainly because applying to traffic calming takes 4 people to sign on to say, yes, I want this project. So most of the time, we at a bare minimum, we get 4 or 5, 6 votes. But yeah, theoretically, even one yes vote will be enough because we've sort of publicized, hey, this is going on. If you want to vote no, you don't want traffic calming, then now's your chance to do so. I do want to clarify, this is 66% of respondents and not eligible voters. So you don't need 2/3 of your whole neighborhood to say yes. It's just those who submit votes is the total that's taken out of. A couple more points of clarification. So really just the owners of residential occupied properties abutting the right-of-way vote. So that's anyone with a property line that touches the street, essentially. This kind of yellow diagram here, that's the mailing list that we pulled to invite everyone here. So that's sort of what I'm describing when I say having a property line abutting May. Say you live on a corner and your address is actually another street, but your side yard's on May. We consider you as an eligible voter for these. If you were to own like 5 properties on the same street, you just get the 1 vote. Any properties that are vacant are ineligible. We mainly check that on like Google Street View. If we see anything on the site visit that indicates a property is vacant, we'll sort of know about it. These typically tend to be just like totally empty lots or buildings that are like being built actively. So we're not really like knocking on doors, checking to see that people live there. It's kind of just a quick check to make sure we're not sending out a bunch of mail to addresses that really have nothing to do with the program. And then finally, businesses are ineligible. That really means like a commercial property operating a business. We don't, if your house is owned by, such and such LLC, but that's really just you, we're not excluding you. It's just business sort of means like a car wash or something to that nature. let's see. So that was May. Nice and simple. This is Dupont. Not as easy to discern who is voting and who isn't. The reason for that is when you have parcels that are divided up into like condos or a couple buildings on one lot, those all are considered as within a property that abuts the street. So a lot of times condos are ones where we send out a lot of mail. I haven't seen that situation results in a whole lot more votes, interestingly enough. But anyway, that's sort of why you see those collections of a lot of small lots. Those are condos, and I think in this case they were actually like almost all owned by a couple different entities. So we're not expecting like a tidal wave of votes here, even though there are a lot of different parcels of land. And then finally, this is Duling. So you can see the large commercial property down on the corner of Gallatin Pike and Old Hickory Boulevard. They do have a piece of property that abuts the right of way, but it clearly isn't a residential, occupied property. So we'll exclude them from that ballot list when it gets generated. And that's pretty much it for this presentation. I'm happy to hang around. Any questions? We can talk as long as needed. Go back to any slides you want to see. But that's basically all I've got for now.
Hey, David, quick question. So if I have a rental property on North DuPont, I'm guessing my tenant will get the ballot.
No, so the records that NDOT has access to generate these lists are Metro Parcel Viewer. That's basically just like a records tool where you are able to find a parcel of land and see who owns it. So the mail always goes to the owners of property. Basically, we just don't have a way of knowing who might be like living in an individual property.
Okay.
So that's sort of what's gonna happen. So if you have a rental property on DuPont, to answer your question specifically, you will get that vote.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Of course. Anyone else? All right. Well, I've got my contact information up on the screen. You're welcome to email me if you think of any questions or if you have neighbors that would like a little more information. As a reminder, this meeting has been recorded. We'll post it to YouTube, so anyone who wasn't able to make it can see what we're talking about here. And then, it's always nice to kind of stay up to date on NDOT things if that's your thing. So they can be found on social media on a number of platforms, as well as TrafficCalming.Nashville.gov is sort of the landing page for all things traffic calming. But yeah, anyway, thanks everyone for coming out. Really appreciate the engagement we've had here, and we'll get your designs finished up and then ballots in the mail as soon as we can.
Thank you.
Of course.